I was sitting in the Council of Races meeting hall, realizing that in 5 minutes I might become the last human who had seen the galaxy still intact. On the holographic screen before me flickered data about a new planet that had just introduced itself with technologies capable of tearing space-time apart like a sheet of paper. My hands trembled as I flipped through the intelligence reports because in 20 years of working as a diplomat, I had learned one iron rule. When something new and incomprehensible appears in the galaxy, the old players start to panic, and panic leads to wars that erase entire star systems. And now, I saw the representatives of the 7 oldest civilizations looking at one another with a level of distrust not seen in the last 300 years. The Council of Races had existed for 4,000 years, and during all that time it did one thing, kept anyone from becoming too powerful. The system worked simply and harshly. Each civilization received quotas for expansion, a list of forbidden technologies, and constant monitoring from the others. Want to colonize a new system? Get permission and prove it won't disrupt the balance. Developed a new weapon? Provide all schematics for inspection or face economic sanctions or even a military blockade. I remember how my old mentor explained the Council's principle to me. It's not about fairness, it's about survival. Because if even one race becomes dominant, it will destroy the others simply because it can. Over 4 millennia, the Council prevented 62 wars and froze technological development at a level safe for everyone. But over the last 10 years, I had begun noticing cracks in this system. The younger races, the ones who had joined the Council recently, started asking uncomfortable questions. Why do the ancient civilizations control 80% of the galaxy's resources? Why do their votes weigh more? Why are they the ones deciding which technologies are dangerous and which are not? Accusations started surfacing during sessions that the Council had become not a tool of balance, but a way for the old races to maintain power and keep newcomers from reaching their level. I saw diplomats break into shouting, ancient alliances starting to wobble, some races secretly expanding their fleets while hiding behind paperwork claiming defensive purposes. The atmosphere was changing, growing heavier, and everyone felt that the system that had held for 4,000 years was about to collapse under its own weight. And now, the New Horizon had appeared with technologies that by all known laws of physics should not exist. Their ships moved without warp drives. Their power stations produced output exceeding the luminosity of stars. Their representatives sat calmly in the hall and smiled while everyone else tried to grasp how bad things really were. I looked at the face of their chancellor, a woman with icy eyes and a perfect diplomatic smile, and thought only one thing. She knows we're all afraid. She sees our containment system crumbling, and she's enjoying it. The Council of Races no longer controlled the situation, and everyone in this hall understood it. They just didn't want to be the first to admit out loud that the galactic order we had lived under our entire lives had just ceased to exist. Their ship materialized right above the Council station without any warning, and that was the first thing that made me realize we were dealing with something completely new. I stood by the observation window staring at that thing, which didn't even look like a ship in the usual sense. Imagine a sphere made of some shimmering material around which space literally distorted, like air above scorching asphalt. Our sensors were going crazy, giving contradictory readings. The ship was here one moment, then in 3 other places at once, then disappeared from reality for fractions of a second. The station's chief engineer, a cyclops named Graish, who had seen thousands of ships in his career, just stood beside me, quietly repeating that this was impossible, that physics doesn't work like that they were breaking every known law of thermodynamics. The New Horizon delegation arrived with 5 people, and their leader, Chancellor Ilara Weiss, immediately set the tone for the entire meeting. She entered the council chamber as if she weren't the one asking to join our club, but rather we were the ones who had to prove ourselves worthy of her attention. The first thing she did was request permission to demonstrate their technological capabilities, and when the council's elder, a centuries-old Krillian who normally needed 3 weeks of paperwork before approving anything, nodded instantly. I understood even he was scared. Alara pulled out a small device the size of a palm, activated it, and in the center of the hall appeared a perfect three-dimensional image of their planet. But it wasn't a hologram. I could put my hand through the image and feel something real, sense the humidity of their oceans and the warmth of their sun. Then the real show began, the one that turned all our ideas of what was possible upside down. Ilara explained that their civilization had learned to manipulate the fundamental constants of local spacetime, and to prove it, they were ready to demonstrate. Her advisor, a silent man with metallic implants running along his spine, placed 3 markers around the hall, and between them a bubble of distorted space formed. Time inside that bubble flowed 10 times faster than outside. We watched a chronometer thrown into it, tick seconds at insane speed, saw a drop of water evaporate instantly, saw everything inside exist in a completely different temporal stream. The representatives of the old races were silent, and in that silence there was more fear than in any words, because we all understood. If they can do this in demonstration mode, what could they do in battle? Alara finished the presentation by explaining their energy sources, and that's when I felt a chill run down my spine. She described a technology that extracted energy from the quantum vacuum, from the very zero point our physicists spoke of only as a theoretical possibility, unreachable in practice. One of their generators, the size of a car, produced more energy than a thermonuclear station the size of a city. They didn't rely on stars, fuel, or resources. Their civilization had gained a nearly unlimited energy source, which meant all our economic leverage, all embargoes and blockades were simply useless. When Alara finished speaking and looked at the council, waiting for a response, the elder slowly rose and said a phrase I will remember for the rest of my life. We recognize New Horizon as an equal candidate for membership in the Council of Races. There was no vote, no discussion, just the acknowledgement that we couldn't refuse them anymore because they were stronger, smarter, and more dangerous than any of us. Over the next 3 weeks, Alara Weiss behaved like a model diplomat, and that was exactly what alarmed me the most. I was present at every meeting of the negotiation committee, and each time she arrived exactly on time, with perfectly prepared documents, with answers to all questions, and with a willingness to compromise whenever necessary. When the representative of the Azari Empire demanded that New Horizon provide full technical specifications of their engines for safety inspection, Alara smiled and agreed to share the basic operational principles, explaining that the full documentation would take years to translate and adapt to our scientific standards, but they were ready to begin that process immediately. She never said no directly, but every yes she gave contained so many conditions and clarifications that in the end, it wasn't clear whether she had agreed or refused. Her advisor, Kyle Terran, worked as the perfect counterpart to Alara. Where she was warm and open, he remained a cold analyst who operated strictly with numbers and facts. At one of the sessions, a Krillian senator openly accused them of hiding the military potential of their technologies, and Kyle calmly presented the council with a full analysis of their defensive systems. He showed diagrams of planetary shields, data on ship counts, weapon specifications, and everything looked impressive but not threatening. Exactly the level one would expect from a developed civilization concerned with its own security. He spoke about how New Horizon had no desire for expansion, that they were only interested in protecting their borders and participating in the galactic community on equal terms. Most members of the council sighed with relief, but I noticed several experienced diplomats exchanging glances. They, too, sensed that they were shown exactly what New Horizon wanted them to see. Alara went further and offered something the council couldn't refuse, a technological exchange program. She announced that New Horizon was ready to share some of its developments in medicine, energy, and agriculture, technologies without military applications, but capable of significantly improving the lives of billions across the galaxy. First, They offered terraforming technologies capable of turning a dead planet into a habitable one within a decade. And I saw the eyes of the younger races light up, those who had spent centuries searching for new worlds to settle. Then came medical nanobots capable of treating genetic diseases, methods for restoring polluted ecosystems, and new ways of growing food. Each offer was carefully calibrated, valuable enough to spark interest, but not so revolutionary that it would completely shift the balance of power. And this was when the council began to fracture from the inside. The younger races, the same ones who had spent decades complaining about the unfairness of the system, suddenly saw New Horizon as an ally and a chance to gain access to technologies the ancient civilizations kept for themselves. They began openly supporting Alara's candidacy, demanding to accelerate the admission process. The ancient races split. The Azari and the Krillians saw the newcomers as a threat to their dominance and demanded stricter inspections, while the Set Trade Federation and the technocracy of the free worlds sensed economic opportunities and leaned toward cooperation. I sat at those meetings watching alliances that had lasted for centuries collapse within weeks, old friends turning into opponents and former rivals suddenly discovering shared interests. Alara simply smiled, agreed with all sides, and continued playing by the rules perfectly, knowing that each of her steps was splitting the council further apart. I learned about the shadow negotiations by accident late one evening when I was returning from the archives and saw the ambassador of the Valorian Dominion leaving Alara's private quarters. The Valorians were a species that had been dying out for the last 200 years due to genetic degradation. Their birth rate had fallen to critical levels, and every attempt by the ancient races to help them had failed. The ambassador looked excited, his bioluminescent skin pulsing brighter than usual, a clear sign of strong emotion for Valorians. The next day at the official session, that same ambassador, who a week earlier had voted against accelerating New Horizons admission, suddenly delivered a passionate speech in their favor. I began monitoring the situation and noticed a pattern. Every 2 or 3 days, someone influential from the council quietly visited the New Horizon delegation, and afterward, their stance at the negotiations shifted. Alara was building something behind the scenes of official diplomacy. Through my contacts in the station's security service, I learned just how large her operation was, and a cold fear washed over me when I saw how precise her strategy had been. To the Valorians, she offered a genetic restoration technology tailored specifically to their biology. They would receive sample batches in a month and the full technology after New Horizon joined the council. To the marginalized Quor, who had suffered raids from space pirates for centuries and couldn't afford a real fleet, Alara promised military protection and shipments of inexpensive weapons capable of securing their trade routes. To representatives of the technocracy of the free worlds, she offered exclusive trade rights for certain technologies in their sector, which meant trillions of credits in profit. To each race, she gave exactly what they desperately needed, something the ancient civilizations either couldn't or wouldn't provide. And every one of them believed their deal was unique, that New Horizon truly trusted only them. The most frightening part was how she handled the ancient races, the ones who actually controlled the council. To the Azari Empire, which openly viewed New Horizon as a threat, Alara privately offered a mutual defense pact and advanced shield technologies for their flagships, hinting that together they could contain the expansionist ambitions of the Krillian Protectorate. To the Krillians, she simultaneously offered support in their territorial disputes with the Azari and intelligence data on Azari fleet movements. I read the intercepted messages and couldn't believe the audacity. She was pitting the two greatest empires in the galaxy against each other, promising each support against the other. To the Set Trade Federation, she offered new trade routes through their spatial corridors that would cut cargo delivery times by a factor of 3. Each ancient race received something valuable, something unique, and each believed that New Horizon had chosen them as the primary partner. I understood the true brilliance of her strategy when I tried to warn several council members about what was happening. An old friend from the Azari delegation listened and replied that they knew about Alera's talks with other races. But it didn't matter, because their deal benefited the Azari regardless of what others received. The Valorian ambassador said almost the same thing. Even if New Horizon was making deals with everyone, the genetic restoration technology would save his people, and that was the only thing that mattered. Alera had created a situation where every race was invested in New Horizon joining the council, because rejecting them meant losing their deal, their chance at improvement. She turned the Council of Races into an auction where everyone bid for her favor. And the worst part was that no one wanted to stop the game, because each one hoped to win more than the rest. I looked at all this and realized that in a single month, Alera Weiss had accomplished what no one had managed in 4,000 years of the Council's existence. She shattered the unity of the ancient races from within without firing a single shot. Agent Corvin contacted me in the third week of the negotiations, and from his voice, I immediately understood he had found something serious. Corvin had worked in the Azari Empire's intelligence for 20 years, specializing in deep infiltration and technical reconnaissance, and in all the time I'd known him, I'd seen him truly alarmed only twice. We met in one of the abandoned docks of the station where there were no surveillance cameras, and he showed me the data he gathered by installing hidden sensors on a trade vessel that passed through the New Horizon system. What I saw on the hologram made my heart speed up. There weren't 5 ships in orbit around their home planet, as they claimed officially, but at least 37, and that was only what could be detected during a short scan. Corvin zoomed in on one of the ships, and I saw a design that had nothing to do with their demonstration craft. This was a military vessel, bristling with weapons and defensive systems. In the following days, Corvin practically lived in his safe apartment, analyzing the data and trying to understand the scale of what New Horizon was building. He showed me a spectral analysis of the energy signatures, and even for me, not a specialist, it was clear that these ships worked on completely different principles. They didn't use warp drives, which distorted space around a ship for faster-than-light travel. Instead, their vessels seemed to carve tunnels through the fabric of reality itself, disappearing instantly in one point and appearing in another. Corvin ran a simulation of a possible attack by such ships on the Council station, and the result was terrifying. They could appear right in the middle of our defenses, bypassing every protective perimeter, strike, and vanish before we had time to react. Our shields, our weapons, our entire military doctrine was built on predicting enemy movement, but these ships made any prediction impossible. But the most troubling thing was that the data contradicted itself so much that it was impossible to make a clear conclusion. Corvin recorded the construction of new docks in New Horizon's orbit, but the speed of construction would suddenly accelerate or slow down for no visible reason. The number of military ships in the system changed from 30 to 70 within days. Either they were relocating their fleet somewhere else, or our sensors were detecting the same ship in different points because of its ability to move instantly. The planet's energy consumption indicated massive military production, but at the same time, most of this energy went to civilian projects, new cities, infrastructure, research centers. Corvin spent whole nights over this data, trying to understand, were they preparing for war or simply building defense, increasing their forces for an attack or afraid the Council would strike first? I looked at his gaunt face and understood he was torn between duty and common sense. A week later, Corvin came to me with a question that had kept him awake. Report or not? If he handed this data to the Azari command, the Hawks in the military leadership would gain a reason for a preemptive strike, and a war could begin that would wipe out half the galaxy. If he stayed silent and New Horizon truly was preparing an attack, he would be guilty of billions of deaths for not warning in time. He showed me the latest set of data. Construction on New Horizon was in full swing. Their fleet was growing, but not a single ship left their system, not a single weapon was pointed outward. It looked like defense, but defense so powerful it bordered on preparation for an offensive. Corvin asked my opinion, and I honestly said I didn't know the right answer. We sat in the darkness of the abandoned dock, two middle-aged men holding information capable of changing the fate of the galaxy, and had no idea what to do with it. In the end, Corvin said he would give himself 3 more days to collect additional data, and if things didn't become clearer, he would report everything as is and let the command decide. I nodded, but we both knew that whatever choice he made, he would never sleep peacefully again. The split became obvious at the emergency council meeting when Corvin finally decided to report his findings, but instead of going through the military command, he went directly to the elders. I sat in the chamber and watched as the hall literally divided into 3 parts after his presentation. To the right gathered those I mentally labeled the appeasers, representatives of the younger races, the Valorians with their hope to save their people, the Set Trade Federation, which saw economic opportunities in New Horizon. Their leader became the ambassador of the Delrian Union, an elderly diplomat who had survived 2 galactic wars and now believed any conflict to be unacceptable. He spoke about how building a fleet was the natural right of any civilization, that we ourselves had military forces and couldn't demand that others disarm, and that New Horizon should be given a chance to prove peaceful intentions. Nearly 40% of the council supported them, and their voices grew louder each day. On the left formed the faction of Hawks, led by Azari Admiral Kravos, a man who had spent half his life in military campaigns and saw a threat in every shadow. He delivered a speech that made many reconsider their stance. If we let New Horizon fortify, if we let them grow their fleet to hundreds of ships, what would stop them from imposing their will on the entire galaxy? He reminded the council of the ancient war with the Faceless, when we missed the moment for a preemptive strike and then fought for survival for 2 decades, losing entire star systems. Kravos demanded an immediate blockade of the New Horizon system, an ultimatum to reveal all military facilities and military intervention if they refused. Behind him stood a significant part of the Azari fleet, the Krillian military, and several paranoid younger races afraid of any change. Roughly 30% of the council supported this hardline stance, and their arguments grew more convincing with each passing day. In the center of the hall, caught between 2 fires, gathered the wait-and-see group, those who wanted more time to collect information, more analysis, more diplomacy before any decisive actions. They were led by Krillian Senator Elysia, a woman known for cold analysis who never made decisions based on emotion. She proposed sending an inspection team to New Horizon, conducting a full evaluation of their military potential, and requesting detailed explanations for every ship under construction. Elysia argued that Corvin's data was incomplete and contradictory, that we couldn't start a war based on unconfirmed suspicions, but also couldn't blindly trust pretty words. Her group made up about 30% of the council, and it seemed they were the only force keeping the balance between peace and war. I sided with the wait-and-see faction because I saw truth in both extremes, but couldn't fully agree with either. And that's when Alara showed herself to be a true master of political strategy. She addressed the council and did something unexpected. She agreed with each of the 3 factions. To the appeasers, she said that New Horizon shared their desire for peace and was ready to sign a non-aggression pact with all interested parties. To the Hawks, she stated she understood their concerns and was willing to accept an inspection team on her planet, but only after officially joining the council, when they would be protected by its laws from potential aggression. To the wait-and-see group, she offered a compromise: immediately provide detailed data on 10 of their military ships as a gesture of goodwill, and reveal full information gradually over the next 6 months. Each group heard exactly what it wanted to hear. Each felt Ilara was on their side. I watched the ancient alliance between the Azari and the Krillians crack, because the Azari demanded immediate action, while Krillian Senator Elysia insisted on caution. The Trade Federation, which for centuries supported the Azari, suddenly began voting with the younger races. The Council of Races, which had existed for 4,000 years as a single organism, was falling apart, and Alara Weiss conducted this chaos like a symphony, knowing that the more we fought among ourselves, the less attention we paid to her. The attack happened at 3 in the morning, station time, and the wail of the emergency sirens woke me up. A sound I hadn't heard in 15 years. I ran into the corridor in just my pajamas and saw soldiers rushing past me, every screen flashing a red emergency code. The command center was in chaos, operators shouting into their mics, trying to reach someone. On the main display was the Terrain 7 system, where a Krillian trade convoy of 12 ships had simply vanished from the radar. They weren't gradually destroyed, didn't send a distress signal. The ships just stopped existing all at once, as if someone snapped their fingers and erased them from reality. 10 minutes later, data arrived from the automated buoys in that system. 3 unidentified ships appeared out of nowhere, fired some kind of weapon that made the space around the convoy literally collapse and disappeared the same way. The entire attack lasted 40 seconds. 8,000 Krillians died, including children and elders traveling to a new colony. By morning, the first debris picked up by the rescue team had arrived, and the technical analysis began, results that blew up an already tense situation. The Council's chief analyst, an old technician named Morgan, who had studied ships from hundreds of races over his career, showed us the scans of the attack site. The weapon's energy signature matched the same space-time distortions we'd observed on New Horizon ships. Same frequency, same quantum fluctuations, same principle of manipulating local spatial geometry. The debris carried traces of technology that only one known civilization possessed. But Morgan, honest to the core, added an important detail. The match was too precise, almost perfect, as if someone wanted us to find these clues. Real military ships always leave unique markers, small deviations in their signatures, individual construction quirks. But here, it was a perfect match to the theoretical model, as if someone had built the ship specifically to frame New Horizon. Admiral Krevos didn't listen to the analyst's cautious comments. For him, the facts were clear enough. He burst into the emergency council meeting, demanding an immediate declaration of war against New Horizon. And behind him stood not only the Azari military machine, but now also the Krillians, who had lost 8,000 citizens. The Krillian protector, usually a restrained politician, gave a speech full of pain and anger. He spoke of children who would never see their parents again, families wiped out of existence by an unknown weapon, and about how the council must protect its members instead of endlessly debating diplomacy. The Hawks finally got what they'd been missing: an emotional trigger, real blood, real victims. The younger races, who just yesterday supported New Horizon, now stayed silent, because voting for those who possibly killed 8,000 innocents would be political suicide. I watched the scales tip toward war and knew stopping it would be almost impossible. Alara appeared at the meeting 2 hours later, and her speech was a masterpiece of political theater. She entered the hall with a face full of sorrow, stood before the Krillian delegation, and expressed the deepest condolences to a people who had lost their children. She spoke slowly, quietly, each word perfectly measured. New Horizon categorically denied any involvement in the attack. It went against all their principles and goals, but they understood the Krillians' pain and anger and were ready to do anything to uncover the truth. Then, she made an unexpected move. She offered the Council full access to their military databases, to records of all ship movements over the past month, to any information that could help the investigation. Moreover, she announced that New Horizon would send its own investigative team to the attack site, because if someone was using their technology for mass murder, they wanted to find those responsible first. Alara looked directly at Admiral Krevos and calmly said, "If the Council wanted a war, they would get one. But it would be a war against an innocent side, and history would remember who started a conflict based on doubtful evidence." The hall froze. The tension could be cut with a knife, and I realized we were standing on the edge of an abyss. One wrong step, one careless word, and the galaxy would plunge into a war that could wipe us all out. Corvin contacted me 48 hours after the attack, and from his voice alone, I could tell he had found something explosive. We met in the same abandoned dock, but now he didn't just look shaken. He was genuinely terrified. Corvin said that after the attack, he decided to check the movements of all major military ships in the galaxy over the past 2 weeks, using data from the Azari intelligence network. And he found an anomaly. 3 ships from the Azari Special Fleet, the same experimental units that had been developed in deep secrecy for the last 5 years, had disappeared from official records a week before the attack. On paper, they were undergoing repairs at a classified base in the Karen system, but when Corvin checked the base's energy consumption, it was far too low for 3 large ships to be present. He showed me intercepted messages between Admiral Krivos and some military contractor. The correspondence was encrypted, but Corvin spent 2 days breaking it, and what he read turned everything upside down. Krivos had been planning the provocation for a month, ever since New Horizon appeared on the galactic stage. The 3 experimental ships were equipped with systems designed to imitate foreign technologies. Azari intelligence had been collecting data on New Horizon's spatial distortions since their first demonstration and managed to create a crude copy of the effect. The ships couldn't actually manipulate space-time, but their weapons left a similar energy signature, enough to fool primary analysis. Krivos chose the Krillian convoy deliberately. They were civilians, and their deaths would cause maximum emotional backlash, and the Krillians, traditional allies of the Azari, would automatically support military action. The plan was simple and horrifying. Kill 8,000 innocents, pin the blame on New Horizon, and gain the Council's support for a preemptive strike. Corvin looked at me with bloodshot, sleepless eyes and said that his own admiral, the man he had sworn loyalty to, had coldly orchestrated mass murder for political gain. But that wasn't all Corvin had found, and the second part of his discoveries was no less shocking. Trying to gather evidence against Krivos, he dug deeper into the surveillance system tracking New Horizon and gained access to data collected over the past 2 months by every intelligence agency in the galaxy. When he compiled it all, analyzed ship movements, energy consumption, construction activity, communication traffic, the real picture emerged. New Horizon truly wasn't planning an attack. Their doctrine was defensive, their ships positioned to protect their home system, no signs of preparing for expansion. But Corvin also saw that they had clearly anticipated the possibility of conflict and were preparing for it with frightening precision. Alara wasn't just building a fleet, she was creating a defensive system capable of standing against the combined forces of the entire Council. And the most important thing, they were using the crisis, the provocations, and the tension to rapidly gain influence, allies, and technological exchanges. New Horizon was playing defense, but an active defense, turning every threat into an opportunity to grow stronger. Corvin laid out before me the full picture of New Horizon's military power, assembled from hundreds of scattered data points, and I felt a chill run down my spine. The 37 ships he initially found were only the first line of defense. Deeper scans revealed 63 more ships hidden in asteroid belts, in the orbits of distant planets, in clouds of cosmic dust. Their planetary shields could withstand bombardment from an entire fleet for weeks. Their weapons were based on principles we were only beginning to understand. They didn't just fire energy or matter, they altered local physical laws, creating zones where engines stopped working, where weapons couldn't fire, where reality itself turned hostile to the enemy. Corvin showed me a simulation of a possible conflict, built from all the data. If the Council attacked New Horizon, we would lose half our fleet on the first day, and that was assuming they didn't use technologies we knew nothing about. He looked me in the eyes and said what we had both already realized. Alara Vase hadn't come to the galactic stage to ask for admission to the Council. She came to claim her place by force, but preferred to do it through diplomacy because it was cheaper and more effective than war. And now, we held proof of 2 truths. New Horizon was innocent of the attack, but they were far more dangerous, stronger, and more cunning than we had imagined even in our worst nightmares. The emergency council meeting convened 6 hours after Corvin and I delivered the evidence of Krivos' involvement in the attack to the elders. The chamber was packed, Not only permanent representatives were present, but military commanders and heads of government who usually participated only through holographic links. The atmosphere was so tense, it felt like the air itself was about to crack. Admiral Kravos had been arrested an hour earlier, his accomplices isolated, and the Azari Empire was in shock that their high-ranking officer had committed a war crime against allies. The Krillian protector demanded public apologies and compensation, and the younger races were horrified by how easily an ancient civilization was willing to sacrifice them for its political games. The Council of Races was falling apart at the seams, and everyone understood that nothing would ever be the same. Alara sat in her chair calmly, almost relaxed, and her composure was more frightening than any words. When she was given the floor, Alara stood and did what no one expected. She revealed all her cards herself before anyone else could start digging. She calmly listed every secret agreement she had struck over the past few weeks: medical technologies to the Valorians, military support to the Quar, trade privileges to the Set, intelligence to the Azari and Krillians about each other. She named sums, meeting dates, specific promises she had made to each race, openly admitting she had played on their contradictions. The chamber froze in shock. Some representatives turned pale as they realized their secret deals were now public. Others flushed with anger as they understood they had been used. Alara methodically dismantled her own diplomatic game, and I couldn't understand why until she moved on to the next part of her speech. She revealed the full data on New Horizons' military strength, not Corvin's hidden numbers, but official ones, even more impressive. 120 warships, planetary defenses capable of withstanding the combined fleet of the Council, weapons based on manipulating the fundamental forces of the universe. Then, Alara told a story that explained everything. 300 years ago, their civilization was called the Rigelian Commonwealth and belonged to another galactic union in a neighboring arm of the galaxy. They were peaceful, technologically advanced, believers in diplomacy and good intentions. When a more aggressive race began expanding, the Rigelians proposed negotiations, compromises, economic incentives for peace. Their allies promised support, guaranteed security, and insisted they shouldn't build up military power so as not to provoke conflict. The Rigelians listened, trusted the system of collective security. And when the aggressor attacked, the allies found reasons not to intervene. Some had trade contracts with the invaders, others feared for their own safety, others simply didn't want to risk anything for a distant world. In 2 years, the Rigelian Commonwealth was annihilated, 8 billion lives erased from the universe. Alara spoke in a steady voice, but I saw her hands trembling. She was one of the 300 million survivors who fled on generation ships and spent a century searching for a new home, vowing never again to trust their survival to someone else's goodwill. Alara looked at the council and said words that changed everything. New Horizon wanted to be part of the galactic community, but not a victim of someone else's political games. They were willing to share technologies, take part in collective decision-making, follow laws and traditions, but only if their security was guaranteed, not by promises, but by real power. They built their fleet not for invasion, but as insurance against repeating the fate of the Rigelian Commonwealth. They conducted secret negotiations not out of malice, but because they knew that in galactic politics, everyone plays for themselves, and pretty words about unity fall apart when real danger arrives. Alara proposed a new model of council membership. They join as an equal member with veto rights on matters of their own security, promise not to use military force for aggression, but retain the right to any defense they deem necessary. In exchange, they open a technological exchange program, share scientific advancements, and help solve galactic problems. She ended with a simple question. The Council could accept them under these terms or reject them, but they would no longer ask for protection no one could guarantee, nor disarm for someone else's comfort. The chamber fell silent, and in that silence, everyone understood the choice before us. Accept, a new reality where strength and diplomacy go hand in hand, or try to preserve an old system that had just shown its rot from within when one admiral killed 8,000 innocents to maintain the status quo. The voting lasted 3 days, and they were the most tense 72 hours of my life. The council didn't split into 3 factions as before, but into dozens of smaller groups, each trying to calculate the consequences of any decision. The ancient races understood that accepting Alara's terms meant the end of their absolute dominance, but refusal could lead to a war they weren't sure they could win. The younger races saw in New Horizon a chance to change a system that had kept them secondary for centuries, but feared they would simply replace one set of rulers with another. I spent these days in endless behind-the-scenes negotiations, listening to arguments from all sides, and gradually realized that the old order was truly dead. Krivos's attack showed that the system of collective security only works while it is in everyone's interest to uphold it, and the story of the Rigelian Commonwealth reminded that promises of protection are worthless without real power backing them. The question wasn't whether to accept the new reality, but how to do so while preserving at least some semblance of order. At the end of the 3rd day, the council elder announced the voting results, and they were unprecedented in the 4,000-year history of the organization. The council accepted Alara's proposal, but went further. It was decided to reform the entire system of galactic governance. Instead of the old model, where ancient races de facto controlled all decisions through a complex system of vote weights and traditions, a new balance of power structure was introduced. The council was divided into 3 chambers: the Chamber of Ancient Civilizations, the Chamber of Developing Races, and the Chamber of New Members, which included New Horizon with a special status. Any decision on military action, sanctions, or restrictions now required approval from all 3 chambers, giving each group a veto. Quotas for technology and expansion remained, but were now set by an independent technical committee rather than ancient race politicians. New Horizon gained the right to any defensive capability it deemed necessary, but committed to open a technology exchange program and never use force first. I listened to these changes and understood that we were witnessing the birth of a new galactic era. The most astonishing thing was how quickly the new system began to function. A week after the decision, New Horizon delivered its first package of technologies: terraforming methods to the younger races, medical developments to the Valorians, improved shields for the trade ships of the Set Federation. Alara personally supervised each transfer, ensuring that promises were fulfilled precisely and on time. The ancient races, having lost part of their influence, unexpectedly found that the new system offered them other advantages. The younger races could no longer accuse them of usurping power. Responsibility for decisions was distributed among all, and the presence of a strong New Horizon as a counterbalance meant no single race could become overly dominant. The balance of power in the galaxy truly changed, but it shifted toward greater stability, based not on fear of change, but on mutual respect and recognition of reality. In the galaxy, there were no longer the weak who accepted being weak, only those prepared to defend themselves and those who respected that readiness. I saw Alara for the last time a month after the reforms, at the ceremony marking New Horizon's official entry into the Council of Races. She stood by the panoramic window of the station, looking at the stars, and on her face was not the triumphant smile of a victor, but a thoughtful, almost weary expression. I approached her, and we stood in silence for several minutes, watching ships of various races move along their routes in a perfect choreography of peaceful coexistence. Then, Alara quietly said that their plan had worked better than she expected. New Horizon had gained security, recognition, and a place in the galactic order without losing its ability to defend itself. But she also added something that made me pause. The real game was just beginning, because now they needed to prove that a civilization built on the memory of genocide and distrust of others' promises could be a constructive part of the galactic community. Alara looked at me with her icy eyes and asked if I believed they could succeed. I honestly replied that I didn't know, but I was glad we had the chance to find out, because the alternative had been a war that would have destroyed everyone. Alara nodded and turned back to the stars. And I thought that the galactic balance now rested on something more reliable than ancient traditions or political games. It rested on the honest recognition that peace is only possible when all sides are strong enough to defend themselves and wise enough not to use that strength first.